Great to be here. Thank you.
I I am so excited to talk to you. I flew through this book. It's so profound. I just love the formatting, the questions and answers throughout this whole thing. It was just so easy to read. So why don't you tell me what inspired you to write this?
Yeah, there was a period where I had moved into kind of relative isolation, and after kind of contemplating experience and working through a lot of this, there was a bit of a shift in identity away from the way we commonly feel ourselves to be, which is to be a body mind, kind of moving through the world as an independent entity, into that aspect of us that doesn't change, that doesn't come and go. And because of that, at that point, I was kind of furiously spending time in contemplating that and meditation and sitting and really trying to kind of deepen that sense of identity shift. And at a certain point during one of these periods, one of these days, a thought came that a book called The Still Point would be written. And that really was the inspiration. It was about 5 years really from that point to when the books, I was able to actually begin to write the book. But that inspiration was there kind of in the background during those next 5 years before it actually began to be put into words.
Wow, 5 years. Gosh, yes, it takes a long time to write a book. But so were you getting the messages? Were they like downloading to you as you were writing?
No, I think that 5 year period honestly was simply more of a period of immersing myself and immersing the mind into that being, into the still point itself, into that recognition. And most importantly during that time, the way that outward life was changing. It's changing in a way to be much more consistent with that recognition. And it seemed like there needed to be the mind needed to be really bathed in its source enough. For a long enough period of time. And then at a certain point, it just felt like, okay, I could sit down and begin to write, and the questions would come, and then, the answers would come from that silence, ultimately. Yeah. So it was truly like that period was really nothing more than, in no way were things coming in. They only came in the moment when I was sitting and actually writing the book.
Yeah, that's great. So talk a little bit about what is the still point?
Yeah, so the still point is the word that I used to describe what has really been described throughout the ages. It's the perennial philosophy of the recognition of ourself, the recognition of our self-aware being, that aspect of ourself that doesn't come and doesn't go. And the recognition of which is also the recognition that we share that being, that the I that looks out from my eyes, what I call I, what is felt as the sense of me, of I am, is identical with yours, for example. And that's ultimately, I mentioned that it's called the still point. It's been called many things in different traditions: awareness, being, Holy Spirit, many Tao, many words have been used to describe it.
Yes. So are you saying then, in order to recognize it, you must be still?
Well, it's interesting because in truth, yes, I think that's, there's great wisdom in the perennial philosophy, be still and know that I am God, for example, as a quote that we've heard, from the Judeo-Christian tradition. There is, in fact, great wisdom in that, because our normal state of attention is given almost exclusively to our experience. It's given to thoughts. It's given to our emotions, to what we see, hear, feel, touch, smell, and the still point is that aspect of ourselves which knows that. And as you said, for us to get still, for us to essentially withdraw our attention from everything in experience, it's then much easier to recognize that aspect of ourselves which knows that experience. So yes, in essence, yes.
Okay, so why is it important, do you think, to recognize and understand the still point?
Yeah, well, when you look at the world, and certainly my own experience was an example of this. Having personally had a lot of anxiety and growing up and really throughout my life, and just a lot of conflict in relationships and whatnot. There was this very kind of lifelong sense that something isn't quite right here. Life isn't being enjoyed. Life, there isn't a continual stream of contentment and peace. And also at a certain point, you see that not only is this like an epidemic of humanity, right? We're anxious, we're depressed, we're fearful, or even if not blatantly, for most of us, there's a sense of we're not completely fulfilled. There's something wrong, and we also, of course, then have the manifestation of this in the world, conflict. We have conflict between nations and racism and pandemics and famine, and all of these things in the world are all ultimately due to the fact that we have forgotten as a race, we have forgotten our true nature, and we have forgotten that true nature is shared. So it's important for the individual mostly, because you can only recognize this in yourself. You can't impose this on anyone else. Everyone has to, of course, come to this recognition themselves. But, it's the only way to come to a lasting peace and a lasting happiness in life. And further to that, you see that if this then becomes, if we return to this recognition, it's the only way that we can solve the problems of the world as well, the wars and the famines and the pandemics and all of these issues. So I think it's, quite frankly, it is the most critical element that humanity needs to get back to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people will resonate with the fact where you say that you had discord in your relationships and anxiety. And I also have anxiety. And so I am trying. That's why I have you on this show. That's why I'm reading these books, is to take a step back and be self-aware, to be aware, to be part of this greater whole, that we're not individuals so much as we're part of this greater consciousness. So let's talk about the ego. Like, where does this all fit in?
Yeah. The ego is the belief in being a separate, individuated self. It is predominantly the belief that what we are is the body and the mind, and thus we have, of course, we believe we share the limitations of the body and the mind. When the body dies, we die. What we essentially are dies. And it further to being a belief for the majority of, unfortunately, for still the majority of people on this planet, it's also a felt sense. It is also the felt sense of operating as an individuated self, an individuated body moving through the world, in a world of others, in a world of otherness, that's other than us. So this is ultimately, what the ego is. Essentially, it is the opposite of the truth of the matter, which is the fact that our being is whole and complete and shared by all.
Yeah. So how does one's life change, and how, if you want to talk about how your life has changed since you recognized the still point?
Yeah, well, the ego, when the ego is the operating system is our operating system. Almost all, we come to see that almost all or many of the thoughts that are arising are based upon that belief system. And our actions, therefore, are based upon that belief system. We act and interact with others as if we are separate, isolated selves, and others are, of course, other, than us. And this creates all of those issues ultimately that we talked about: the anxiety, the fear, the lack, the lack beliefs, of course, the fear of extinction, the fear of death. So when we come to recognize that simple sense of being, and we spend time in immersing ourselves in that over and over again, the long held structures or conditioned beliefs of the ego begin to drop away and begin to fade. And ultimately, there's fear diminishes. Things like the fear of lack and the fear of death eventually go away. Our relationships begin to improve. And we're able to move through the world in kind of a vastly different way than we did when we were under the belief system of being an isolated, separate self.
Yeah. And so what are some practices that you recommend in your book to get to the still point?
The book is really written about something called the direct approach or the direct path, if you will. And this is the approach of going directly to the felt sense of awareness that we have. We all have a felt sense of I am, felt sense of being. And it's always present. If it wasn't present, it's the knowing aspect of our experience. If it wasn't present, we wouldn't have any experience. It's the irreducible aspect of our experience. So we go directly to the recognition of that, and then we return to that over and over again. We return to it in what we can call meditation, when we sit quietly, as we discussed a little earlier, in terms of not giving all our attention to the senses, but just letting our experience be. And sitting as that being itself without attaching ourselves to thoughts or to emotions, letting them simply come and go, letting them rise and fall. And over time, our identity, we begin to recognize that this is what we've called I our entire lives. This is really what we fundamentally are. So the practice is then returning to that over and over again. Again, whether you're sitting quietly in meditation or, in fact, in the face of all experience, because that being, that knowing aspect is ever present. It is always present at all times.
Yeah. You know what I really liked about one part of your book where it was like, how would your life change? And one of your answers was, like, even if you're cleaning, instead of like being like, oh, I hate, this is mundane, you look at it and be like, well, I'm doing this. It benefits my health. It benefits my family's health. It's for the greater good. And I really loved taking just a simple task and looking at the deeper meaning of it rather than just like, oh God, I don't want to do this. So, can you expand a little bit more on that?
Well, I think that, when you're anchored in being, when you're anchored in the still point, then the task or whatever is happening in the world, whatever you're doing or you're not doing, tends to really, really flow in a different way than when you're completely immersed in the outcome of what may or may not happen, what you may or may not get from that particular task. It's that end gaining, if you will, which we all tend to do, goes away, and we're focused, kind of concentrated in the now, in the moment. So the task that we're doing, whatever that is, becomes the focus in and of itself. And It's very akin to kind of being in the zone. You hear sports, for example, analogies, being in the zone. It's very much like that, but it's not restricted to a sport. You could be sweeping the floor, or you could be cooking, or you could be doing something that's much more complex. But the focus is on that really in the now, and the being is the non-changing being is really what is primary. And it leads, of course, to that flow-like state, which we've all experienced, which experience is kind of wonderful in that regard. We're freed from the so-called outcome of that experience. And very often, because of that, you're much more effective in whatever it is that you're doing or saying or writing because of that release.
Yeah. I love that you say that you let go of the outcome, because I think many of us, including myself, try to control the outcome of something. But if you're just in the zone, if you're just focusing on what you're doing, you're not thinking of the future. You're not thinking about what's going to happen. And oftentimes, because you're present, things just work out. Like, I just feel like things just work out.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. It's there's a great power and a great power to being truly in the now. There's no question about it.
Yeah. Love that. Okay. So tell me how your book is different than others on the market.
The hallmark, I think, of the book is that it relentlessly takes the reader back to themselves. It's relentlessly pointing the reader back to the still point. It's not a book, for the most part. If someone's interested in acquiring new information or new knowledge about spirituality or meditation, there will be, of course, little tidbits in there about certain teachers and really interesting, aspects and points about that. But in truth, it just continually points the reader back to themselves, meaning that it's somewhat meditative. And I think that if it's the type of book that should be read slowly, and you should allow the words to really direct you, the reader, to that aspect of yourself that knows the words. In that regard, I think that the book served that purpose. It served that purpose of just a relentless pointing back to the still point of our true being.
Yeah. Yep. I got that. So, who will benefit most from this book?
Certainly anyone who is drawn to it in any way. If there's one of the great, I think, realities of all of this is that there are many people who haven't reached that point of turning around, haven't reached that point of kind of being exhausted with suffering, if you will, with the state of resistance that most of the world still lives in. And until that point is reached, it's very difficult. It probably won't resonate very much for many people. But when someone has reached that point, when someone has kind of had that willingness, that little willingness, as it's described by many traditions, to really begin to question all of the beliefs that they've held, because they haven't been working. That's the primary the primary issue, whether it's anxiety or fear or whatever it may be. For those people, I think it can be a great benefit.
I love that. It's like you put it out there, and who needs it will find it. And I wholly believe in that philosophy. I think people are drawn to it when they're ready. And there's that quote, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? And
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, since the book was published, I've come to really see that more and more. It's very, very apparent. I mentioned, I think, many times in the book, the danger of trying to go out and proselytize this as a philosophy or try to force this on individuals doesn't work. In fact, I think it's counterproductive, to do that. I think people who are fascinated with, continue to be fascinated with experience and still have a great belief that the answer could lie in experience need to do that. They need to exhaust that. They can't, it has to be their own individual decision that kind of says, all right, this isn't working. There must be another way. And in that regard, it's very much exactly what you said. You put it out and those who need it will find it in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. So someone does find this and they're reading it. What would you like them to take away from it?
Simply the fact that they are the still point. The still point is what we all essentially are, and the still point is unbroken peace and happiness itself. So when we come to see that, you can imagine a world or a society in which an increasing number of people come to see this. It would be a beautiful world and a beautiful society. And, it of course begins with the individual, because for that individual, there's a transcendence of really the knot of fear and contraction that we all have when we believe and feel that we are separate beings.
Yeah. Yeah, there's almost a comfort. There's a comfort in knowing that you're part of this greater whole, because when you feel separated, that's what causes the anxiety. That's what I'm getting from this right now. So, wow, this is mind blowing. So, where can the people who want to find this book find it?
Yeah, I think it's everywhere online. You can just Google The Still Point. With my name, or there's not many books called The Still Point, but you can find it online. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of the outlets. And there's a website. I have a website, author KevinKrenitsky.com, where people can get in touch with me if they want. And, and I'll certainly respond, to them. It isn't hard to find. At this point, you probably can't walk into your local bookstore and find it, of course. Again, those, most of the books there are reserved for the outgoing, search for entertainment and, something new and whatnot. But it is available readily online.
Well, great. I appreciate you talking to me this morning, and I think your message is divine. And I hope listeners, viewers, pick this up. Thank you, Kevin, for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Anna Catherine. It was wonderful. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.